So the truck in a truck, the guy that's him and his tools, what does he have to sell? Is it sellable?
It's absolutely not sellable. He has a job. Every day that you wake up, you should be thinking about the profitability of your business. So how can you make more money and how can you add more assets? You're not just like a plumber or electrician or a roofer. You're providing an actual service that's increasing the value of somebody's life. So you should act accordingly.
Agreed.
I've been consulting for 18 years for the blue collar field. I help scale businesses, sell them, and help additional, if you're like an owner, just do a roll up and buy businesses. So scale, sell, and buy.
Okay. And in your 18 years, how many businesses have you bought, sold, and scaled?
Hundreds.
Hundreds. Okay.
Not
Roughly
thousands, because
like.
I'm super boutique, so I wouldn't say thousands, but definitely hundreds.
Okay. So between 100 and 1,000.
I would say more like between 700 and 1,000.
Okay. So that's a lot of companies. So you've seen a lot of things. You've worked with a lot of people.
Yeah, a lot. I've seen a lot of things. Like just this month, I've talked with 311 business owners, and of that, 24 contracts went out, and of that, 3 were signed. So when I say like I've done hundreds of businesses, it's not like I'm just doing those businesses. I'm talking with thousands of other business owners. So it's a culmination of not just 18 years experience, but literally thousands and thousands of businesses that I've looked at, combed through, seen financials on, have worked with, and connected to the owner.
And how did you get into this 18 years ago? What were you doing before?
I was speeding, so I went to jail. So I believe that success loves speed, and I notoriously do not like rules. That's why I'm an entrepreneur and I make them. But I went to jail for speeding after getting 36 tickets. But I spent 7 days refining my business plan, got out of jail. Here we are 18 years later, still doing the same thing that I created. Which is awesome. It's a blessing, but also coming from a small town, I learned a lot of different values that have translated into the blue collar world, because that's the world that I grew up in Iowa, in a little village, I call it, of 237 people.
So you just decided that you wanted to be involved in, what do you call it, mergers and acquisitions?
So in the beginning, it was just scaling. So I just helped businesses scale. And then once I scaled to a point where I exited, then I decided to help others with that. And then one of my own clients came to me and was like, hey, I think we should buy 6 businesses. And so that's how that started. So it wasn't just M&A from the beginning. It literally was like, how do we do turnarounds? And one of the first businesses I turned around was a business in Atlanta, Georgia, and they were in the fitness industry. And their marriage was falling apart. They had 5 kids. They did not know how they were going to be successful, but at the end, they are still married. Their kids are grown, and they have a thriving fitness business.
So what experience did you have that allowed you to just go into scaling businesses? Did you have a business background before that? Oh,
no,
okay.
But nobody cared 18 years ago. So it's not a matter of like what I had in terms of experience. And it's never been that, I would say. It's always about who I know. And I think that's true for every business owner. So try to get yourself in front of the people that are decision makers, that have leadership positions, that are key management roles, and can write you a check.
Fair enough. Is that still how you get your customers today? Is it referrals or?
100%. Yep. I think referrals are the best form of business. I'm not a fan of running ads. I'm a fan of quality service and connection to the customer and communication and building rapport and relationships. Whether they do business with me or not doesn't matter. I am always going to take that approach because I think it's the best for getting someone to trust you enough with their home and with their money and with their business.
Yeah, I would agree. Your company's called Blue Collar. So, do you work with many tradespeople, construction type companies?
I work with the trades all day, every day. So roofing, plumbing, electric, any of those type of businesses. Actually, I've got a story for you. So back in the day, I saw this house for sale on Facebook Marketplace, and I actually ended up buying it. And I went to school to get my GC license because the trades that were working for me, I did not think were up to my standards. And it was the middle of winter in Minnesota. And I bought this house for $47,000, and my intention was to flip the house. So It's not just do I work with the trades. It's literally like I know the trades because I've been doing them in my own houses.
Cool. Like how many tradespeople do you talk to on a monthly basis, would you say?
Oh my gosh. I don't know. Probably like 250, 260.
You get a view that most people don't. So do you see any trends or like can you talk to us about what you're seeing from your perspective in the industry?
Okay, so the biggest trend that I see is that everybody wants to sell their business, but the fact remains that they're not prepared to. And one of the biggest fallbacks of this is that they hire 1099 contractors. So a true business would hire W-2s. They would put them on payroll. Now, in the world of blue collar, this is oftentimes hard because you want to get bids, and those bids determine who's ultimately going to get the job. And a lot of those bids come from guys that have 1099s. And even worse than that, a lot of those guys are not licensed, insured, bonded, or have any type of business. And they're either just getting started or have been doing it a long time. And so they just fall back on, I've had this experience for many years, so I don't necessarily need to follow the regulations of the industry, which is fine, but that's not something that you can scale or sell. So it goes back to chuck in a truck. And it's an unfortunate scenario that oftentimes plays out where you got the main guy who's the key player in the business doing all the work, and at the end he thinks he has something to sell, but it's really just him doing the labor and his truck that he owns with the tools in it. So I would always recommend that people scale to the degree that they have W-2 employees, they have some sort of real estate that can go with a sale, they have tools that they are taken care of, and they're counting in terms of like a spreadsheet or something else, and just invest in assets, because ultimately every single blue collar business is going to qualify as an asset sale, not as a stock sale.
So the chuck in a truck, the guy that's him and his tools, is it possible, like, what does he have to sell? Is it sellable?
It's absolutely not sellable. He has a job. So only thing that I could pay for is his customer list. And the only reason that anyone would want to pay for his customer list is if he had contracts with commercial properties. And a lot of times that doesn't happen. It's few and far between. I have a guy in Houston, Texas. He has contracts with 14 car washes. Other than that, he doesn't have a business. But those 14 car washes are under contract, and that alone is worth the amount of money that someone is willing to pay. In that case, it's about $150,000.
Okay. Like, what is the value of a contract, or what are the components or the things that you look at in a contract to determine its value?
It's not so much what is written in the contract. It's more or less, do they have a contract? Because if you're just like a handyman putting up a fence or painting a window or like doing little tiny jobs, like the chances of that person being a repeat customer after a business goes through a transition isn't very high, because the reason that they chose your business was because of you. So being able to have the systems and operations in place is really important, so that you are not the reason that they're choosing the business. And if you are, there are other people equally as qualified and knowledgeable on any of the trades, electric, plumbing, heating, water, whatever, that could come into the home at any point should you die or move on or sell or otherwise, where the customers wouldn't be upset or like choose to go with a competitor.
So the assets being, would you consider a contract an asset in this regard? So
yeah, and you're not going to be able to get a lot of those contracts, but one of the things I like that some electrical companies do really well is that they'll give you like a promotional package where it says like, hey, you're paying, let's say $29.95 a month, and at the end of the 12 months, we'll come out here and make sure that your electrical is working, that everything is satisfactory and up to code in the home. And it's just really just a checkup on the home. It's nothing more than that, but it's $29.95 a month and it's residual income. So between the contract that the electrical company, in this case, as a scenario, and the residual, those are both huge factors in the valuation of a company.
Okay. Contract subscriptions, obviously like tools and vehicles and stuff like that. Real estate, you mentioned.
Yep.
What about like branding? How much do you value like the brand or the footprint of a business in their market?
Depends on if you have a trademark or not. So one of the businesses that I represent is Griswold's, and Griswold's has a trademark and is obviously famously known for Home Alone. So because it's known, it has a much bigger factor than, say, Bob's Plumbing. And nobody knows Bob, nobody cares about Bob, and Bob is not anywhere. So it really depends on what your name is and if it's trademarked or if it has some substance to it.
Besides the trademark, how do you measure the substance?
You don't.
Okay.
So this is one of the things that I would tell anybody buying a business, and no matter what trade they're in, is do not transfer the LLC with your transition. So let's say that you, Chuck, are buying Roman's business. I would tell Roman to keep the LLC, and you are going to open a new LLC entirely, and then you're going to do a DBA, doing business as, like Roman's Plumbing or whatever. And the reason is because if Roman owes taxes or has liens or anything else that's not found on a USCC search, which is the search that we use to find liens and loans and stuff like that, then he is responsible for that. Whereas if you take over the LLC, you will be responsible. So it's better to do a DBA and open a new LLC than it is to transfer the LLC.
Okay. And can you explain what is what's a trademark in this regard?
A trademark is where like no one else is permitted to use the name. So for example, Griswold's Lighting is out of Houston, Texas. And they are a father and son duo, but there is actually a Griswold's Lighting in Florida, which got a cease and desist, and they are no longer allowed to be Griswold. So all of their trucks, all of their trailers, all of their everything has to be rebranded, or they have to pay a nominal fee for using the name.
Dang. So is it worth like the average company worrying about getting a trademark?
Not the average company. If you want to make your company worth something, yes, go do that.
And then what if you get a trademark and there's already 1,000 other companies with the same name?
Then you cease and desist them and you ask them to pay you the fee.
Brutal. Are there people
Welcome
just
to the
doing
world.
that all the time?
No. So this isn't something that's obviously, it's not something that's well known. It's obviously not something that's talked about or even something that's brought to people's attention when choosing the name for a business. So it just so happens this particular guy thought out this strategy very well as part of a marketing plan. But when people go into the trades, they're not thinking about marketing. That's like the last thing that's on their list. So I would say they're more concerned about, customer care and getting customers than they are worried about a marketing plan and how to retain these customers and get them on something residual or under a contract.
So like plumbing company has website,
Mm-hmm.
they sell 100, they gain 100 clients a month from it. How does that impact your valuation?
What is the average cost of acquisition of those customers and how much are they bringing to the bottom line? So just bringing in 100 customers is worthless if they are not actually adding money to the bottom line. So we're going to look at NOI, which is net operating income, and going to determine what the multiple is based on that, not based on this website brings in 100 customers.
Okay. You mentioned that you talked to like over 300 people in the last month, but you only signed 11.
No, I signed 3. And I sent out 24 contracts. Yeah.
24 contracts, signed 3. What happened to the other 297?
They're just connections. So I'm really big about connections. I'm really big about adding value to people's lives. So some of them are not ready for sale because I've given them enough information for them to know like they have work to do. Some of them could be ready for sale, but they are the owner operators, meaning that there's not a lot for them to sell. Some of them are buyers and they're out going to try to look for their own businesses to buy with their own tools and knowledge that they have. But all of them, are going to connect with me when they're ready, and that's fine. I don't need to take on that many clients. I'm not obligated to, do that many phone calls. I do it because I love it. So I'm super passionate and obsessed about doing this every day. And if I just make like an impact in a plumber's life or an electrician's life or a contractor's life in the simplest regards, then that made that phone call worth it to me.
So you're talking to people in all different stages of this
Yep.
journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, could be the startup guy. Like, there's a landscaping company that called me. The kid is 23 years old, and he was complaining because he had 5,000 in outstanding invoices, and he was scared to call the customers and ask for the 5,000. And this is what I would tell any contractors: like, don't be scared to pick up the phone and ask for the money. The work is already done. The expectation is that the client was going to pay you from the get-go, so you deserve the money, and they know that. So there's no reason for you to be scared to ask for the 5,000. But don't continuously let your books, and this is something I see a lot of in contractors, is they continuously let their books get behind because their workload increases. And so by doing this, like, you're not doing a service to yourself, you're doing a disservice. And so whether it's you or somebody else, like, continuously pick up the phone and do not let your books get behind, because that money that needs to be in your pocket is also money you could put towards projects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just at the bank yesterday, and the guy next to me is a concrete guy that I know, and he was cashing some checks, and one of them was over 6 months old, so they wouldn't cash it. And it's like, darn it. Now he's got to go back and try to get another check.
Well, so that's the thing, is like, these are blue collar guys. They're not guys that are, fiscally knowledgeable. They haven't been to school for being an attorney. They know nothing of actual, like, business sense. What they're doing is they love the trades. They're skilled at the trades. They want to engage with the customer in the trades. So having that knowledge is imperative to a successful business and to scaling and exiting. And so if you don't know how to do it, just get somebody that does. You shouldn't be running to the bank once every 6 months. Whether it's your wife, your assistant, a nanny, anybody that you are trusting. And that's the other thing, is like, you have to trust. And in the trades, there's not a lot of trust. And so you have to create ways for you to trust people and for them to do the work for you, in the sense of looking at your financials, reaching out to the customers, making sure your books are up to date, keeping, contracts of your customers and stuff like that.
So right now there's a lot of people in the industry who are getting ready to retire. Maybe they never thought about selling their company. Maybe they have, but they don't know. Can we talk a little bit about the game plan that people can get on to start preparing their business to sell? You already mentioned that getting W-2 people instead of 1099 contractors is a big deal.
Yeah.
Is that a make or break for the sale of a company? Like, for a general contractor that does get bids from all over the place, like, is it possible to sell a company that does it that way?
Possible, but your multiple will be significantly lower and your finances will be significantly impacted.
Can you throw out some numbers of what that means? Like, what's the difference of them?
All right. So
everything else the same, 1099 versus W-2.
There's a company that I represent. It's a roofing company. They've got 60 trucks. They are located in St. Louis, Missouri. They do roughly $10 million a year. All of their employees are W-2, and the owner has for almost 3 years sort of worked his way out of a job by trusting these other people. But he literally was chucking a truck. He was that guy that you call on to do roofing for insurance companies and repairs, and he would do the estimation, he would do the customer service, he would do the door knocking, he would do all the things. And he realized, like, he was in way over his head. And now, obviously, because his business does $10 million a year in revenue, it's worth a substantial amount more than what it was. But one of the things that you could do from an asset perspective is, when you have money invested in the real estate for the business in some capacity, whether it's a small office, whether it's a storage facility to store your truck or your tools, or both, or it's, you need a large fleet, so you buy a much larger commercial building. Either way, as long as you've got some sort of asset in addition to that's where, like, the small growth can happen. So real estate is a really important aspect in addition to the 1099s and the W-2s. And then making sure that you actually own the building and not lease it. So if you lease it and there's a clause in there that says that you cannot transfer, or you can transfer with a substantial fee, because commercial leases are oftentimes, between 3 and 5 years, sometimes 10. You have to be careful of that. So that's another thing that plays into it. And then, how long have you been in business is something else. So you can be as skilled as you want, but if you're selling a business that's been around 2 years versus 20 years, there's a big difference.
Why is there a big difference?
So one of the things I personally require is a 4506T, which is a federal tax form where I pull your taxes. And I personally, when looking at these businesses, require 3 years worth of taxes. So 2 is not enough. If you're trying to sell a business that's been in business for 2 years, you probably don't have a lot of substance, and the reason for sale is frivolous. It's more like you're just trying to get out of a dying company, which it's about to die, so it's time to go. Versus a 20-year, which is something much different. It's got more substance, it's got more power, it's got more recognition, it's more genuine in the capacity that people have been calling on the business for a long time, even if it's just the owner. So the length of business, it varies dramatically, as does the location of the business. So say like Akron, Ohio versus Orlando, Florida is obviously going to get a different multiple just because the need of the business is different. So the pricing and the margins would also be different. Like Akron, you could probably paint a house for, I don't know, probably $4,000. Orlando, it's like more than double that, right? So it all affects the bottom line. So you'd have to take on more projects to get to the number that it would take in a much larger area, regardless of the industry.
Is there like a certain size population, like a certain size market that is ideal? Like, do you automatically prefer a higher populated area, or is there like a happy place in the middle?
Everybody's happy places wherever they want to be. I don't think there's like, hey, you should go here or there. Like, you should go wherever you're happy and do whatever makes you happy. So it's not really a major thing to be in a city versus the country. I think it's more or less like, just understand that where your location is going to be dependent on what your business does, not only in terms of revenue, but also in terms of margins and multiples.
Yeah, the reason I ask is because, like, for us, we do marketing. So
yeah.
I would much rather get a client on the outskirts of a major city than a client inside a major city, because the competition level on the inside is so much higher. You can go in and do everything perfectly, but you have a lot of catch up to do. And even if you are competing with the top players, you're still sharing whatever demand there is with them. Whereas out in the country, you might, like, the revenue value of the jobs might be less, but you can get 10 times as many of them for a fraction of the cost. So from a marketing perspective, it's much easier to compete. So I just wondered
So this is true, but then we have to look at, like, so if you do have 10 times the amount of jobs, right? Who's doing those jobs? Like, are you subbing them out, or are you actually doing them in-house? Because if you're doing the bidding, then you would want to do them in-house, not sub them out. So I get this perspective, and I appreciate it, because it makes competitive pricing a lot easier to determine who's going to do what in terms of, like, the contractual work that needs to happen in your house or business or anywhere else. But it's not a bad thing. It's just a different way of doing business. Like, so for example, my lawn guy, he charges me $120 a month. There is nowhere in Orlando, nowhere that you can get that guy for $120 a month. And like, when I try to get bids from other people, they're like, yeah, this is like a $350 a month job minimum. And that's like a minimum. And this guy's over here, like, is not even competing. Like, my neighbor, she's like, yeah, I asked one if he could do my lawn because I know he's $120 a month. I'm like, yeah, and he's been doing my lawn for 2 years. Like, I don't know. He never asked for prices. Last year I didn't pay him for 6 months because I was out of the state. He never asked me to pay him. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, that's what I mean. Like, you really, truly have to run it as a business if it's a business. Like, you should be calling me up saying, why aren't you paying your bill? Like, or just not servicing my lawn or whatever. But like, at the end, you have the right to raise prices. You have the right to ask for your money. You have the right to call people on the books, and you have the right to, like, ask them to continue to do business under a contract. So by all means, he should be saying, like, look, I've serviced your lawn for 2 years. Get under a 12-month commitment. Or if you don't, like, there's a $50 buyout fee. And I would be like, absolutely. It's like, it's a no-brainer. But he doesn't do that. And so I don't know who his competition is, but he's cheap and I love it.
So I take it you're not telling him to do that.
He didn't ask for my advice. And I don't just give people advice to give them advice, right? Because first, Juan is from Venezuela. And even though he has been, and the previous owner used him too. So I know he's been in business at least 5 years. I just don't know how he's making it. I have yet to figure this out. So
But
that's the thing is, like, we all have different lifestyles.
Uh-huh. Well, and that's part of the challenge of the construction industry is like you can be a company and trying to do everything by the book and pricing properly and marketing and doing all of that. But a lot of times you're competing with guys that are pricing at a level where it's not really sustainable. Like you couldn't sustain at that level. Maybe they can, maybe they can't. But it overall kind of commoditizes and lowers the prices of a lot of services.
I think this depends on where you're at, right? So, using my own house as an example, this weekend I wanted to get new flooring. So my guy, his name is Jonathan. He's done my house last year, and we're going to do a kitchen remodel, a major bathroom model, and all new flooring. So he says, get LVP. And I'm like, Jonathan, listen, this is a $1.2 million house. There is no way in hell we are putting LVP in this house and taking out hardwood. It is not going to happen. So I don't know if it's just a matter of location in terms of like where contractors are, but you can actually bid based on the actual house itself or the commercial project itself being in a really prime area. I live in a golf course. And so like that alone, when contractors come over here, is like, oh, the price went up. So it's really just not a matter of knowing your craft and being diligent at it, but pricing according to the craft. So like LVP flooring would be super cheap for me to put in, right? And Jonathan would make, I don't know how much. But hardwood flooring, on the other hand, is going to take like 6 weeks to do all of this. And at the end of it, he can charge substantially more because it's going to take more work. And I, of course, suggested that to him because I know what my house is valued at. But at the end, like, when you are doing projects to this degree in homes of this caliber, you have to use the right product. And in doing the right product, the quality of the work increases, and therefore so does the cost. And so just people have to understand that. So if you're bidding an LVP job, or you're bidding, you know, plumbing for a $40,000 house, it is completely different than bidding plumbing for a $700,000 house, or doing, you know, anything inside of that. And that's where you're going to have to figure out, like, how much are you worth per hour and how much is this project worth?
Mm-hmm. Pricing's a big struggle. Guys seem to have a lot of trouble raising their prices. They always think in regards of like, how much could they pay for something?
Yeah.
But like, I know exactly what you're talking about. Like when we were in Portland remodeling kitchens, the houses were worth $1 million. So the kitchen needs to be, you know, over 100,000 to like fit the area, where we could do the same kitchen in Idaho and it's 50,000 because the house is worth half as much. You wouldn't want to put a $50,000 kitchen in a $3 million home, like,
because it just appreciates the value of the home.
Yeah, exactly. So it's
by 300,000.
Well, yeah, it's the same thing with marketing. Is like you don't want to provide a $10 million company with like a $1,000 a month marketing plan. Like that doesn't fit them.
Yeah.
You know,
well, that's the other thing is like they're willing to pay more because they know what they have. So you just have to know who your customers are and what they're willing to pay. Like, and at the end of the day, they're going to pay that because they have to pay it in order to keep their own home at the cost that it is without losing value, or their own business as the quality that they so highly guard as their brand. So those are all things to take into consideration. But I guess like my advice to anyone would be like, don't be ashamed to ask for more. People are willing to pay. Don't be ashamed to ask them to pay their bill. They know that they're obligated to pay. Like, don't be ashamed to cut off the services because people didn't pay. Like, you're a business, so act like a business. You're not just a contractor. You're not just a landscaper. You're not just like a plumber or electrician or a roofer. You're providing an actual service that's increasing the value of somebody's life. So you should act accordingly.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So we talked about selling the business. So W-2 over 1099s, assets like real estate, vehicles, contracts, super important. Subscriptions too. Is it important that the subscriptions are on a long-term contract?
I don't think more than 12 months is necessary, honestly, because in the fields that you're working with or this audience is in, 12 months is pretty substantial, because in 12 months your entire life could change. You could have a child, you could, move homes, you could do a lot of different things. And so I just take that into consideration.
Okay, and then trademark brand, if is something, should everybody do that if they're thinking about selling, or when does that become important?
It only becomes important if you're trying to master that market. So obviously Griswold's is in Christmas lighting. They're trying to master Christmas lighting. That's what they do. That's what they're proud of doing. That's what they want to be known as doing. And they want that connection to the movie. And so it depends on what you're thinking in terms of marketing, and it depends on what your strategy is in terms of gaining customers. Now, obviously that comes with a lot of headache. So I wouldn't say that there's a lot of businesses that need to trademark anything, because nobody wants to be sitting out here doing cease and desist all day, or dealing with people who are upset because they've got to unwrap their trucks and start all over again. Count the cost. I personally wouldn't trademark, but that's me. He decided to go that route because that's what his brand represents to him, and it's what's important to him in terms of values. So yeah, figure out what's the most important to you and do that.
Okay. And then can we talk a little bit about valuating based off of the income of a business, to give people an idea of if they have these other ducks in a row, how much can they kind of expect to get for their company?
Depends on the company, depends on the location, depends on how much the business is actually worth, depends on if your finances in order. There's a lot of ifs. So, standard is between 3 and 7 times on any one of the trades industries.
So 3 to 7 times what?
3 to 7 times NOI, net operating income.
Okay, so the net operating income. So if you're netting 100,000 a year, maybe 300 to 700,000 is what
Correct.
You could get.
As long as your financials and your taxes show that you legitimately make 100,000.
Okay. So where do people go wrong in that regard?
Oh, they start writing off everything under the sun. They write off every lunch they brought at McDonald's, absolutely everything. And that's completely unnecessary 3 years before you decide to sell, because there is something called add backs, and add backs is basically where we take stuff the owner added in, and insurance is a really good add back, an example. So your insurance policy, I would add that back into the asking price on top of the net profit, because I am not going to pay that insurance policy. So while I am writing that off as a legitimate expense for my taxes, I also am going to give that back to the business on their bottom line, because that's a separate expense for the new owner. So there's a lot of things that could be considered an add back, and each of those will be taken into consideration individually. But during the 3 years prior to selling a business, just try not to do all these write-offs, because it's really unnecessary and it creates a lot of complications. And from a buyer perspective, it's really difficult to justify some of those things, and as a result, it can cost company hundreds of thousands of dollars. So,
it's kind of like when you're getting a mortgage.
Yep.
When you're trying to buy a house, you want to make it look like you make as much as possible.
Yeah.
Same thing
with
selling a business. You want to make it look like you're netting as much as possible. To make sure I understand the add back. So an add back is an expense that the new owner won't necessarily have to make.
Correct. But you are able to write that off on your taxes. Because it is a legitimate expense to the company. So insurance is always one of those things. You're going to be licensed, bonded, and insured. But that doesn't mean that the new owner is going to have the same license, bonding, and insurance. And so therefore, that's their own expense that they'll put into their budget for the cost of running the operations of the company. But that doesn't translate to you and your expenditures going over to them as something that they would buy, because they're not buying that.
I still don't quite understand.
Okay, so
the you mentioned insurance. So current company, they expense a certain amount on insurance.
Yep.
New owner, they'll still need to do the same thing, right?
They do need to do it, but their insurance policy could be a completely different premium.
Okay. So it's
So
the
they'll
difference in
write
the
it off on
premium
their
is what
own.
considered.
Yep, the premium gets added back into the valuation.
Is there any consideration of what the new premium will be?
Nope, don't care. That's your own expense.
Okay. What other examples are there that are common on add backs?
It really depends on the industry. So, like, for example, I just did an evaluation for a web development company. We added back almost $200,000 worth of expenses. Insurance was one of those expenses, but other expenses included travel, included some dining fees. We literally went line item by line item in the P&L to things that she wrote off on her taxes and like recognized what was legit and what was not. Obviously, like other things to take into consideration are SBA loans or loans of any kind. So those can't be transferred during the sale. SBA loans are not transferable, but if you just have a regular loan, you can either add the person to the loan or they can take over payments of the loan. But in all honesty, you should just pay off the loan and they should get their own loan.
Why is that?
Why is it that you should get your own loan?
Yeah.
Because then the transition just becomes cleaner. It just becomes an easier process. Like, so for example, me and you don't know each other, right? And now we're tied together financially because you put me on your loan with the expectation that I'm going to pay. But if I default, then you have to make the payment, but you aren't necessarily the owner anymore. You just let me put my name on your loan for the equipment, let's say. And there's no like payoff for you for doing that. It's literally just more liability. So I try to mitigate the liability off the seller as much as possible by telling them like, don't transfer LLCs, don't transfer like loans of any kind, literally any kind. And let the new buyer deal with whatever the consequences are of defaulting on any of that. Because if they don't have the cash up front, they shouldn't be buying it anyway. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay,
I just
cool.
wanted to make sure I was understanding. Less headaches to come back and bite you later.
There's a lot of biting you later that could happen. It's a real thing.
What other things commonly come back to bite you later?
I think the biggest thing is just the honesty part. Like, if you are trying to hide shit, it's best if you're just honest. Just be honest about it. Like, people are still willing to pay overpriced. Like, I had a client pay $300,000 over what the evaluation came back at because the other party was completely transparent and honest. They were like, "Look, we're moving to Greece. We want to sell this business. We want to sell it to you. You're the most qualified of the bidders, and we want to make this work, but we don't want to make it work for less than $700,000." And the business was only evaluated at $400,000, and the buyers were like, "Well, we want this business, so in order for us to literally create this business from scratch and buy all this equipment and get all these employees, it would cost us more than the $300,000 extra that we're paying. So we're willing to do that." And what's cool about that is their bank actually permitted that to happen on an SBA loan. So there are times that government-backed loans like the SBA 7A permit you to overpay for a business on the basis of the business being legit and having good financials and the previous seller being honest.
So being honest and on top of your stuff, it can go a long way.
Goes a long way. Goes all the way normally to the bank.
Go figure. So we've talked a lot about the seller side. Let's talk about the buyer side for a little while. So like as a seller, you want to have these ducks in a row. As a buyer, like where do you focus on first? Like what are the first things you look at?
What industry do you want to be in? And if there's a sub-industry, what price point do you want to buy in? What are you capable for a down payment of, or are you seller financing? So SBA requires 10% down. You could seller finance. You could pay cash. You could do a HELOC, which is a home equity line of credit on your existing home. It depends on how you want to finance and then what price point, what industry, and then ultimately, like, are you going to be an owner operator? Are you just going to be the guy that owns the business but puts management in place? And then location obviously matters as well. And I think those are probably the 5 biggest factors in buying.
From what you see, do more people want to be owner operator these days or like absentee owner?
Totally absentee. They want to be absentee and they want residuals. That's what they want, which is ironic because the businesses that are selling are not owner absentee. So between now and 2029, there will be more businesses in the blue collar that sell because owners are retiring than ever before. Chuck, you and I are the same age, so we know that technology is a critical component of our generation, and we want our freedom. So why would we want to be the owner operator of the business when we can just integrate AI tech or some type of system to operate the business for us to some degree where we're free to go off and do whatever we want, and still get paid generously to do so?
Of all the buyers, is there a certain demographic that is buying more businesses than others?
I think people in their 30s are getting smart. So what they're doing, and what I love about what they're doing, is they're buying the blue collar, but they're seller financing it. So they'll find an already existing kind of established business that isn't profiting a lot, knowing that they can make the profit margins almost double, but they will do it on the seller's money. So they'll seller finance the deal, and then when they buy the business, that's when you know that you're making the most money. So that's where all money is made, is when you are buying, because you're buying the concept that you can come in and increase the margins, you can increase the technology, and you can increase other components of the business to make whatever dollar amount you believe that you can make. And that's the only reason that you would buy a business. So they come in with this mindset of that's what they're going to do. And they're like in their 30s and they're like, okay, I'm going to buy whatever amount of businesses before I'm 40 or before I'm 50, and do it on somebody else's money. So it's intelligent and it's a good strategy and it's a win for almost everyone.
Is that something that you're actively participating? Is that side of it? Or are you just sticking with the initial transactions?
Do I stick around for the transition?
Yeah, I mean, do you have any part in the second part of like building up the business, changing the operations, making it more profitable?
So the scalability of it is the third part of what I do, which is the first component of the businesses that I started 18 years ago. So that's the scaling part of it. So initially I'll just get, hired for the buying or selling or potentially scaling. But if you're buying a business with the intent to scale it, it's not just about scaling. Oftentimes it's about turning the entire business around. So it's not just looking at the money aspect of it. It's looking at the cost of customer acquisition, how long the customers are there, and then also like the marketing, the sales components, the financial components. There's a lot of different categories that one would look at if they were to determine if they were truly worthy of scaling to the degree that they believe they are.
And for the people doing this, are they scaling to keep or are they scaling to resell it later?
Flips.
Or both? Flips? Is that the big thing now?
Flipping businesses, yeah.
So what's
sometimes it's worth it, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's worth keeping in your portfolio. Honestly, it really depends on what it is. So I always keep car washes in the portfolio. I keep storage units in the portfolio. I keep RV parks in the portfolio. I keep a lot of things that are easy to manage from afar and make a lot of profit. Whereas there's other businesses that I simply would just pick up, flip, and move on.
What's the average timeline to flip a business?
3 years.
3 years. How come?
The taxes. Gotta have 3 years worth of taxes.
Okay. So it's like buy it, change a bunch of stuff, and then create 3 years of evidence to sell it to the next guy.
Yeah. It's not just evidence, it's scalability factors, but also you really want to be careful on your taxes, right? So there's two types of sales that you're doing. You can do an asset sale or you can do a stock sale. So often in e-com, we do what's considered a stock sale where someone has X amount of stock in the business and therefore they have no physical hard assets. In blue collar, it's the total opposite. It's all physical hard assets. So you could upgrade your equipment in that time as well. And so the depreciation would be less of a factor than it is if you had old equipment where there's a huge depreciation factor. And so the 3 years is really a substantial period of time where someone could completely turn the business around from non-functional or dysfunctional to highly operational, turnkey, owner absentee.
Okay. So that's the goal, is take a business that's kind of maybe not ready for the absentee owner, turn it into one that is, because that's what most buyers want.
That's what most buyers aspire for, but they only aspire for it if they have money. Like the others are just buying your generalized businesses.
With the intention of operating them at themselves and
Well,
earning
they
an
won't have a
income.
choice, actually. That's part of the problem is they don't have a choice because it can't be owner absentee. So that's the dichotomy of what we have going on here between like the older people wanting to get out of their business and thinking that they built a business, which they didn't really build a business. Maybe some of them did. And there are some legit businesses that are worth millions of dollars that they actually did build a good business. But what we're seeing right now is really just our generation scooping up opportunity that's already been built on a kind of rocky foundation that can be slightly modified and more than profitable.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm starting to see it everywhere, but imagine you've been seeing it for quite a while.
Yes, I expect to see this like for a long time, and we've seen this for probably trending the last 12 months.
Have you done any like groundwater industry companies like well drillers and
I haven't sold or bought any of those. I have one guy that's doing a roll up right now in a septic company. So he may expand services onto that once we finish the roll up. But his intent really is to buy septic companies and then roll them up into other services. So like porta potties and stuff like that, since these are obviously super rural areas where there's not sufficient water or sewer to gain access to it. I know that you're asking that because that's what you want to do. So, I mean, we can make that happen. It's just a matter of understanding the industry a little bit more. But regardless of the industry, right, all of the things are the same. So, like, it doesn't even matter what the industry is or if I have or haven't done it. The fact is, like, we're looking at the same financials. We're looking at the same taxes. We're going to look at the same ad backs. We're going to look at the same operations, systems, people, all of that. So like from your perspective, you're looking at it as, is this, a business that's going to make a lot of money? Is this a business that makes sense? Is this a business that I can run? From my perspective, I'm advising on something completely different. Like, while that's taken into consideration, it's more like, is this business something that can live past 5 years and make money? And also, does it make sense for you to spend this amount of money on it to put it in your portfolio?
Yeah, that makes sense. It's in like an investment from your perspective.
Oh, 100%. Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at it from an investment banking perspective, and you're looking at it from a job perspective, which sounds kind of bad, but that's the difference between like how I would value something and how you would value something.
So if somebody wants to talk to you about selling their business, what do they need to prepare for the conversation?
They just need to have a conversation. So that's the thing, is like, it's not preparing for a conversation. It's literally just you and I getting on the phone, just like we're doing right now, and having a conversation and seeing the legitimacy of the business, but also the viability of the market that you're trying to sell your business in and what that multiple might look like for you.
Cool.
Yeah.
And if anybody listening or watching this wants to talk to you, how do they get a hold of you?
So you can find me on Facebook. That's my only social media. bluecollarbusinessadvisors.com is the easiest way. On there is my phone number and my email, both of which I regularly check and connect people with. So bluecollarbusinessadvisors.com.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Do you have any final comments or remarks that you want to leave everybody with? Give them something to think about.
I would say every day that you wake up, you should be thinking about the profitability of your business. So how can you make more money and how can you add more assets? Those are the only two things you should take into consideration when you're making decisions. Everything else is just kind of worthless.
Understood. Well, thank you so much for your time, Melissa. It's been really exciting to hear what you're up to and learn what this stuff looks like from your perspective. And I look forward to being able to talk about it more in the future.
Awesome, Chuck. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure.